What if the person who promised to protect you was the one who kept you asleep for years? Isabella thought she had everything: a loving husband, a beautiful home, and peace after long days. Every night, he handed her a small white pill, saying it would help her rest. For years, she believed him. For years, she slept peacefully beside him, until one night, she didn't take it. And the truth, waiting just 2 streets away, shattered everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and freedom. Would you rather know a painful truth or live forever in a beautiful lie? Tell us in the comments what you would have done if you were in Isabella's place. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to her rebirth path for more stories of courage, healing, and rebirth. There was no sound of ticking in the Moore mansion. No clocks, no alarms, no reminders that time existed. For Isabella Moore, days melted into nights in a blur of comfort and routine. Once a celebrated architect, her hands had shaped skylines and her name had graced design magazines. Now, those same hands folded napkins on a dining table set for 2. Ethan Moore, her husband, was the kind of man who made silence feel like luxury. Polished, graceful, always in control. He spoke softly, but carried the weight of a man who owned too much money, too many secrets. Each evening, he came home precisely at 7. Dinner was served at 7:30. The wine was poured exactly 3 fingers high. The pattern never changed. After dinner, he would watch her with those calm eyes, saying, "You look tired, my love," before placing a small white pill in her palm. "It helps you rest." His voice was a lullaby of reason, his touch a promise of safety. And Isabella, who once drew blueprints for freedom, swallowed obedience every night with a glass of water and a smile. At first, it felt like care. After years of long workdays and endless deadlines, she thought she deserved peace. She believed the pill was kindness in a capsule. "You don't have to think about anything," Ethan would whisper, brushing a lock of her hair behind her ear. "Just rest. I'll take care of everything." And she did. She rested. She slept. For hours, for days, for years, until rest became her prison. Sometimes she would wake up and find the curtains drawn, though she didn't remember closing them. Sometimes the flowers in the hallway had already been replaced before she even noticed they'd wilted. There were days when she felt an emptiness behind her eyes, as if time had been erased while she slept. But Ethan would smile and tell her she worried too much. He managed every detail of their lives, the finances, the meals, even the people she met. Her old colleagues' calls stopped coming. Invitations from friends were misplaced. Her phone was always out of battery. And when she asked about children, Ethan would hold her hand and say gently, "Let's wait a little longer. You need to rest more first." She didn't question it. Love, she thought, meant trust. But trust, when it stretches too long, begins to sound like silence. One afternoon, as she sat by the window, sketching mindlessly, Isabella realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd finished a drawing. Her lines were hesitant, like someone afraid of their own imagination. The pen slipped from her fingers. She stared at her reflection on the glass, a woman with soft curls, expensive clothes, and eyes that no longer looked alive. That night, the air in the mansion felt heavier. Ethan's footsteps echoed through the hallway. He handed her the usual pill, his gold wedding ring catching the warm light. "Good night, darling," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. But Isabella hesitated. She turned the pill over in her palm. It gleamed white and harmless. Yet something inside her, something buried deep under years of sleep, whispered no. She smiled faintly, pretended to swallow it, and set it on the nightstand once he turned off the light. The minutes crawled. The silence stretched until she could hear her own heartbeat. Then, somewhere in the dark, came the sound. Soft, deliberate. The metallic click of a key turning in the lock, followed by the distant hum of an engine starting in the driveway. Her breath caught. She lay perfectly still, the sheet cold against her skin. For the first time in years, Isabella Moore did not fall asleep. She opened her eyes to the darkness and waited. The morning sunlight poured gently across the white marble floor of the Moore mansion, soft and golden, but it couldn't reach the cold corners of Isabella's heart. Ethan had already dressed in his navy suit, perfectly pressed, with a silk tie that shimmered faintly in the light. He adjusted his cufflinks and smiled at her, that same calm, rehearsed smile that had once made her feel safe. "I have to leave tonight," he said casually as he sipped his coffee. "A business trip. Just one night." One night. Two words that made something inside her tighten. She nodded, feigning calm. "Of course," she whispered, stirring sugar into her tea, though she hadn't tasted sweetness in a long time. When he turned to leave the room, Isabella's fingers trembled as she palmed the little white pill he had placed beside her saucer. She closed her hand around it, feeling its smooth, traitorous surface against her skin. Then, with the quiet precision of an architect, she lifted his suit jacket from the chair and, with the gentleness of a woman who had been silent too long, slipped a tiny tracker into the lining of his vest. Ethan returned moments later, kissed her forehead, and looked at her the way a man looks at something he believes he owns. "Don't wait up," he said, smiling. "You need your rest." She smiled back. "I always do." The front door shut behind him with the finality of habit. Isabella stood motionless in the silence he left behind. Then she walked to the window, watching his car roll down the driveway, sleek, black, unhurried, until it disappeared beyond the trees. That evening, as the sun fell behind the rooftops, the house felt too big, too empty. She sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, the screen glowing faintly in the gathering dark. The small red dot, the signal from the tracker, began to move. Street by street, corner by corner. Then, suddenly it stopped, 2 streets away. Her breath hitched. She stared at the screen, willing the dot to move again to prove her wrong. But it stayed still, pulsing quietly like a heartbeat. The air around her thickened with disbelief. A thought, no, a truth, began to form in the corners of her mind, sharp and cruel. Isabella put on her coat. The night air outside bit at her cheeks as she stepped into the quiet neighborhood. The heels of her shoes clicked softly on the wet pavement. Streetlights glowed dimly in a mist that smelled faintly of rain and pine. When she turned onto the next street, her eyes caught the light, a familiar car parked before a small white house, its porch glowing with warmth. Laughter spilled through the curtains, the kind of laughter that didn't belong to a home like hers. She took one step closer, her hand covering her mouth as if to hold back the truth. Through the window, she saw him, Ethan, standing in a soft glow of lamplight. He looked different there, relaxed, unguarded. A young woman with golden hair walked up to him, smiling. She wore a red silk robe. And then, from another room, came the sound of children's laughter, high, innocent, unknowing. Isabella froze. The woman reached for Ethan, wrapping her arms around him. He bent to kiss her like it was the most natural thing in the world. Something inside Isabella shattered quietly. 10 years of dinners, of smiles, of gentle lies collapsed into the street beneath her feet. Every kiss, every touch, every pill had been a curtain drawn between her and the truth. She turned away, numb. The air was colder now, heavy with the scent of betrayal. Her eyes burned, but no tears came. She had cried enough in the years she thought she was happy. When she finally reached home, the mansion loomed larger than ever, a silent monument to the life she thought she had. She stepped inside, closed the door, and leaned against it. The ticking she had longed to hear, the ticking of time, of life, was still missing. Only her own heartbeat filled the air. For a long moment, she stood in the darkness, her hand trembling over the untouched pill still lying on the bedside table. Then she whispered to herself, her voice quiet but steady, "It's time to wake up." And for the first time in 10 years, she didn't feel afraid of the night. Days passed like echoes in an empty house. Isabella moved through the mansion as if she were haunting it, a ghost trapped inside her own life. Every room still smelled like him. Every polished surface reflected the illusion she once believed was love. But illusions, once broken, do not mend. They scatter like glass, sharp and shining with truth. She could no longer pretend not to know. The pill on her nightstand lay untouched for days. Sleep no longer came easily, but she preferred the ache of wakefulness to the comfort of deceit. One morning, while the fog still curled around the garden, Isabella called a number written on an old card, a private investigator her friend had once mentioned years ago. His name was Thomas Gray. His voice, calm and warm, carried the weight of someone who had seen too much of the world. "I can find the truth for you," he said. "But sometimes the truth hurts more than the lie." She replied softly, "I've already been living inside the lie." For the first time in years, she felt the smallest pulse of control returning to her veins. Thomas began his work discreetly, following Ethan's routine, tracing his calls, his payments, his travels. Isabella didn't ask for updates at first. She was terrified of what he might uncover. But fear, she realized, was only another form of the sleep she'd been trapped in for a decade. So she waited. A week later, a plain envelope arrived. Inside were photos. Clear, undeniable. Ethan standing beside a young woman in Miami, their hands intertwined, the sunlight warm and familiar on their faces. Another photo followed, a house, modern and bright, with a silver car parked in the driveway. A child stood by the front gate, smiling. The next page revealed another woman, this time in Chicago. Elegant, poised, with a baby in her arms and a diamond ring glinting in the light. Behind her, Ethan's face appeared again, bent toward the child with a tenderness Isabella had never seen directed at her. 2 women, 2 homes, 2 children. Her hands trembled as she placed the photos on the table. The laughter of the children seemed to echo through the quiet of her house. Her house, the one filled with silence and sterile perfection, where no child had ever cried or laughed. Her doctor's words returned to her now, cruel in their simplicity. The long-term use of sedatives may have affected your ability to conceive. Ethan had sat beside her then, hand on her shoulder, whispering, "It's okay, love. You just need rest." Now she understood. He hadn't wanted her to rest. He had wanted her silent, still, and barren. For a long while, Isabella sat unmoving, her fingers tracing the edges of the photographs. There were no tears left. Grief had burned itself out, leaving behind something harder. A quiet, heavy understanding. The next evening, she stood in the grand hallway of her home, staring at her reflection in the tall mirror. Behind her, the chandelier glowed softly, golden and cold. The woman in the mirror looked calm, almost regal. But her eyes had changed. They were no longer afraid. She remembered Ethan's voice. "You don't have to think about anything. I'll take care of everything." Now she whispered into the empty room, "Yes, Ethan, you did. You took everything." Silence answered her. But it was no longer suffocating. It was hers now. She walked through each room, the living room, the dining hall, the bedroom, touching the furniture he had chosen, the curtains he had picked, the life he had built. Each object felt like a lie made solid. And yet, under that weight, something new began to rise. Not rage, but clarity. She went to her desk and opened her old sketchbook. Her fingers hesitated before drawing the first line, shaky but alive. For the first time in years, she drew not for anyone, not for approval, but to remember that she could. Outside, the night pressed against the windows, thick and silent. The house stood still, like it was listening. Isabella looked around once more. At the walls that had heard everything, at the ceilings that had hidden her dreams. And she said, barely above a whisper, "You can't build a prison strong enough to hold a woman who wakes up." The pen fell softly from her hand. The truth had arrived, and though it hurt, it was finally hers to hold. The morning light stretched across the marble floors like thin threads of gold, touching everything but warming nothing. Isabella stood by the tall window, her reflection staring back at her. Pale, fragile, a ghost of the woman she used to be. The once celebrated architect, the young woman who once dreamed of designing skylines, now barely recognized the stranger in the glass. Her hair, once full of color and life, fell limp against her shoulders. Her eyes looked hollow, like the windows of an abandoned house. For years she had built her life around a man who told her she was safe, while quietly stealing the pieces that made her whole. It wasn't humiliation that tore at her now. It was grief, deep, steady, and ancient. The grief of a woman who had loved too faithfully and for too long. She had given Ethan everything, her youth, her career, her laughter, even her body's chance to carry life. Every rest, my love, had stolen another piece of her future. Every pill had been a quiet erasure of who she was. And yet, for all his wealth and charm, she realized Ethan had never truly owned her heart. He had merely put it to sleep. The realization didn't come like thunder. It came softly, a whisper in the morning silence, a warmth rising from deep inside her. She watched the reflection of the woman before her and said aloud, barely above a breath, "No, I will not disappear." The sound of her own voice startled her, not because it was loud, but because it was hers again. She walked to the dresser where the familiar bottle sat, small and white, the label neatly typed, "Prescription for sleep." How ironic, she thought, that it had never brought her rest, only darkness. She lifted the bottle, feeling the weight of it, of every night it had stolen. Then she opened the window. The wind outside was cool and carried the scent of pine and water. Beyond the garden, the pond shimmered faintly in the afternoon haze. She stepped outside, barefoot, the grass damp beneath her feet. The world felt alive in a way it hadn't in years, every leaf trembling in the wind, every bird's cry echoing faintly through the air. At the edge of the pond, Isabella stopped. The surface of the water rippled softly, catching her reflection, the same tired face, but with something new in her eyes. Strength. She held the bottle tightly for a moment, her fingers trembling. So many years of her life were inside it, her silence, her numbness, her captivity. Then she threw it. The sound was soft, a small splash, almost tender, but it carried the weight of 10 years. The bottle disappeared beneath the ripples, swallowed by the stillness. For a long moment, Isabella simply stood there, watching the water settle again, watching the last circle fade. The sun broke through the clouds, casting a thin light across her face. For the first time in years, she felt her chest rise freely as she took a deep breath. Tears welled in her eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow. They were of something gentler, rebirth, the kind that comes when a woman finally chooses herself. As she walked back to the house, she noticed the silence no longer frightened her. It wasn't empty now. It was space. Space for something new to grow. She passed the hallway mirror once more and paused. The reflection was still her, still thin, still tired. But there was a spark there now. Something alive, something ready. And when she whispered this time, it was not a plea, but a promise. I will live again. Outside, the wind carried her words across the pond. And for a brief second, it almost sounded like the world was answering back. The days grew quieter after Isabella threw the bottle away. Silence no longer suffocated her, it steadied her. Each morning, she would open the curtains herself, letting sunlight flood the once dark corners of her world. The air felt different now, lighter, though the truth still hung like frost on her breath. She had made a promise to herself that morning by the lake. If she could survive the truth, she would never again live as someone else's shadow. So she began to act. The old Isabella might have wept, begged, or waited. The new one observed, collected, and planned. Every day while Ethan was at work, or at business meetings, as he liked to say, she searched quietly through drawers, folders, and forgotten cabinets. She found fragments of his other lives everywhere. Bank transfers to women she didn't know. Receipts for properties in Miami and Chicago. A bracelet inscribed with initials that weren't hers. A photograph tucked into his desk. Him holding a little boy with the same green eyes. Her hands trembled, but she didn't cry. She took photos of everything. Printed copies. Saved files. Each proof became a brick in the wall of truth she was building, not to trap herself again, but to protect the woman she was becoming. Every night, she sat by the small desk in her studio, a candle flickering beside her, and wrote. Not reports, not accusations, letters. Each one began the same way. Dear Isabella, the woman I once was. She wrote to the girl who believed that love meant obedience, to the wife who smiled while swallowing poison disguised as care, to the dreamer who gave up her career because she thought marriage was a safer home than ambition. Her words were soft, almost motherly. I forgive you for trusting him. I forgive you for not seeing. You wanted love, not cages. You deserved better, but you didn't know how to ask for it. Each letter ended with a small truth, one she had never dared to say aloud. You are not broken. You are only waking up. By the end of the week, she had a small pile of envelopes sealed but never addressed. She didn't need to send them. Writing them was enough. They were her goodbyes, to the illusions, to the silence, to the woman who had once loved Ethan more than she loved herself. But truth, even when handled gently, has a way of making noise. One evening, as she was filing away a copy of Ethan's offshore transfers, she heard the sound of the front door slamming. The echo rolled through the house like thunder. Isabella! His voice was sharp, furious. She froze for a moment, then calmly placed the papers into a folder and turned to face him. Ethan stormed into the room, eyes blazing, holding a printed statement in his hand, one she hadn't hidden well enough. "What is this?" he shouted, waving it in the air. "You've been spying on me, going through my private things?" His anger filled the room like smoke, thick and suffocating. He swept his arm across the table, sending her papers and pens crashing to the floor. The candle toppled, its flame dying instantly. "You've betrayed me," he roared. "After everything I've given you, this house, this life." For a heartbeat, Isabella felt her old fear stir, the instinct to shrink, to apologize. But then her eyes met his, and the fear vanished. "No, Ethan," she said quietly. "For 10 years, you betrayed me." Her voice was steady, calm as the surface of still water. He stared at her, stunned. She had never spoken to him like that before. "I'm not the woman who slept through her life anymore," she continued. "I'm not the one who took your pills and believed your lies. I'm awake now." The silence that followed was heavy, electric. For the first time, Ethan didn't look like a man in control. He looked afraid. He took a step back, his jaw tightening. But Isabella didn't move. She stood tall, her posture unshaken, the faint reflection of the candlelight gleaming in her eyes. "This isn't over," he hissed. She smiled softly, almost sadly. "It already is." As he left the room, slamming the door behind him, Isabella bent down and began to gather the fallen letters one by one. The ink was smudged, but the words were still legible. She placed them neatly back on the table. There was peace in that small act, the kind that comes when a woman finally stops asking for permission to exist. Outside, the night deepened, and the reflection of the moon shimmered faintly on the lake beyond the window. She picked up her pen again, and on a new sheet of paper she wrote, "Dear Isabella, you kept your promise. You woke up." The headlines came and went, like waves that crash loudly before fading into the sea. "Billionaire's wife wins everything in shocking divorce." "The silent woman who fought back." Isabella didn't read a single one. The world could keep its noise. She had finally found her quiet. When the judge handed her the papers, she didn't feel triumph. She felt release. After 10 long years of silence, the world was loud again. But she no longer feared it. She had her freedom back, and for the first time in her adult life, the air felt light enough to breathe. She left New York the same week, taking only a suitcase, a paintbrush case, and her mother's old sketchbook. The rest, the jewelry, the marble, the luxury, stayed behind. They belonged to the life she was leaving, not the one she was about to begin. The train took her north to Maine, following the gray stretch of the Atlantic coast. When she stepped down at the small seaside town, the wind was sharp with salt and pine. The people smiled as if they'd known her forever. She rented a tiny white house with peeling shutters overlooking the endless blue. And there, for the first time in years, she slept without fear. Not the sleep of pills and forgetting, but the kind that comes when your heart is unburdened. Weeks later, she visited the local orphanage. The building was small but filled with color. Paper cranes hanging from the ceiling, walls painted in crooked rainbows. The children's laughter echoed down the halls. Something inside her softened. When the director told her they didn't have an art program, Isabella smiled. "Then we'll build one." And they did. The first day, only 2 children came. Shy, quiet, clutching crayons like secrets. Isabella showed them how to mix colors, how to let their hands move without fear. By the end of the week, there were 10. By the end of the month, 20. The old classroom turned into a garden of colors. walls covered in drawings of suns, oceans, and faces smiling wide. They began to call her Mom. The first time it happened, she froze. It was little Anna, a freckled girl of 8, who said it while tugging at her apron. "Mom, look, I drew you with angel wings." For a moment, Isabella couldn't speak. Tears welled up before she even realized they were there. She knelt, cupping the child's face in her hands. "Sweetheart," she whispered, "I'm not your mother." Anna smiled, simple and certain. "You are now." After that, the name stuck. Mom, Mama Bell, Mother Bell. Every time one of them said it, something inside her healed a little more. It wasn't pity that bound them. It was love, pure and ordinary, the kind she had always dreamed of giving. The family she'd been denied had quietly found its way back to her, not by blood, but by belonging. Each evening, she'd walk them back to the orphanage gates, watching their small figures fade into the twilight. Then she'd return home, make a pot of jasmine tea, and write in her journal by the window. "I used to think rebirth was about starting over," she wrote one night. "But it's really about remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget." The children's laughter still lingered in her ears. Sometimes they brought her seashells, little notes, or messy paintings of her surrounded by flowers. They filled her quiet home with the sound of life. On Sundays, they would all gather at the beach. The wind would whip through their hair as they ran barefoot across the sand, and Isabella would stand by the shore, the sea curling at her feet, the horizon stretching endless and kind. When she watched them, she no longer felt like the woman who had lost everything. She was a woman who had been reborn, through laughter, through paint, through the small arms that wrapped around her waist, calling her Mom. And when the sun dipped below the water, painting the world gold, Isabella whispered to herself, "This is the life love wanted for me all along." The morning began like any other in the small coastal town, with the smell of sea salt drifting through the open window and the sound of little feet running across the wooden floors of the art studio. Isabella had just set out brushes and cups of paint when she felt a gentle tug on her sleeve. It was Lily, the youngest of the children. Her dark hair was tied into uneven braids, her eyes as bright as morning sunlight. She looked up with a question written across her small, curious face. "Mom," she asked softly, "why do you always talk about long sleeps?" Isabella paused, surprised. Around them, the other children were laughing and mixing colors, painting suns and stars and wildflowers across the long sheets of paper. But for a moment, everything went quiet. She knelt down to Lily's height, her smile warm but distant, like someone remembering something far away. The light from the window reflected in her gray-blue eyes, making them shimmer like the ocean outside. "Because, sweetheart," Isabella said gently, "sometimes we have to sleep for a very long time to learn how to wake up." Lily tilted her head, frowning in thought. "Like a fairy tale?" "Yes," Isabella said, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's forehead. "Only in real life, the prince doesn't wake you up. Your own heart does." The little girl grinned. "Then your heart must be really brave." Isabella laughed softly, the kind of laugh that carried both sorrow and peace. "Maybe it finally learned how to listen," she said. When Lily skipped back to her seat, Isabella stood there for a moment, her gaze drifting toward the large canvas standing in the center of the room. She had been working on it for weeks, layering color over color until the painting seemed to breathe. It was called Rebirth. On the canvas, a woman stood on the shoreline at dawn, her arms open wide, the wind lifting her hair like silver threads. Behind her, the ocean glowed gold with sunlight, waves rolling not in anger, but in forgiveness. The children often said it looked like their mother, but Isabella knew the truth. That woman was every woman who had ever been broken and brave enough to begin again. As she picked up her brush to finish the last detail, a soft shimmer of light across the horizon, Isabella felt something shift deep within her chest. It wasn't pain anymore, nor loss. It was stillness. Years ago, she had thought that waking up meant walking away from Ethan, from the lies, from the life that had imprisoned her. But now she understood. Waking up was not about escape. It was about returning to herself, to love, to the small miracles of every ordinary day. She turned to look at the children. They were her life now, her little mosaic of laughter and second chances. Each one carried a story, a scar, a beginning. And they had all found their way to her, just as she had found her way to them. As the sunlight warmed the studio walls, Anna came running in, holding a flower she had picked from the garden. "Mom, we put your painting in the middle of the room," she said proudly. Isabella looked and saw what the children had done. They had cleared a space and placed her painting upright, surrounded by vases of wildflowers and seashells. Beneath it, someone had written in uneven, childish letters, "For Mom, who taught us that light always comes after sleep." Her throat tightened. She didn't cry. Instead, she placed her hand over her heart and whispered a silent prayer, not of sorrow, but of gratitude. "Thank you," she murmured, "for this second life." Outside, the sea breeze pushed open the curtains, filling the room with the scent of salt and paint and jasmine. The light spilled over the canvas, and for a moment, Isabella felt as if the woman in the painting smiled back at her, alive, free, and unafraid. That evening, as the sun sank into the horizon, Isabella brewed jasmine tea and sat by the window. The children had gone to bed, their laughter fading into dreams. The sea whispered against the shore, and she watched the waves shimmer under the silver moonlight. Life was quiet now, beautifully, tenderly quiet. But within that quiet, there was song. The song of forgiveness, of peace, of rebirth. And as she lifted her teacup to her lips, Isabella whispered the words she once feared she'd never say again. "I am home." When winter's last snow began to fade, Isabella walked to the shore with her children, her small circle of miracles. The tide whispered softly, carrying fragments of ice that melted under the morning sun. She watched as the waves took them away, leaving only light behind. Somewhere deep inside, she understood. The snow was never meant to last. It was only there to remind her that even the coldest season has its end, and every frozen heart can learn to thaw. She closed her eyes and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Not for the pain, but for the faith that had carried her through it. And as the sea shimmered gold before her, Isabella smiled. Spring had come, not to the world, but to her soul.